citizen of the world.
One of them took a fast plane to Kashmir to stop a war.
One of them took a night train to Poland to fight beetles and Bang's disease.
One of them took a slow boat to China, trailing a dope smuggler.
And one fed 1 million children. One got shot in an ambush. One stopped an epidemic. One was a poet. One was an emperor. One was a prophet. One was a businessman. And at first there were only a few scattered around the world. But now there are many and growing. And they're around you. And for all you know, you may be one yourself.
The CBS Documentary Unit presents Lee J. Cobb in Citizen of the World, a program written and directed by Norman Corwin and containing the voices of many people, some of them recorded in far countries, some of them speaking from this microphone, and most of them more or less concerned with doing something to make life healthier and happier in the world of which they are citizens.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, men of Athens, people of Mexico, fellow Americans. We are gathered around a hot microphone tonight to consider what kind of a bird is the citizen of the world, who he is, where he comes from, what he does, and what he has to do with you. Ever see one? Would you know him if you saw one? If not, be advised, you can't tell him from the cut of his clothes or the blend of his tobacco. Not one ever swam the English Channel or flew across the Atlantic. Hence, there have been no confetti parades in his honor. Few were ever considered distinguished by a whiskey company, and their words and deeds have been as varied as Sanskrit and Pidgin English, as wide apart as the Golden Horn and the Golden Gate. Sometimes their work is unglamorous, like the announcement by one of them in a routine report out of Geneva, Switzerland, not long ago.
One plague-infected rat found in Bombay.
Sometimes they've spoken centuries ago. And solemnly, sitting on cushy upholstery, as did an emperor type named Aurelius in Rome.
Mankind are under one common law, and if so, they must be fellow citizens, from whence it will follow that the whole world is but one commonwealth.
Sometimes their work is hard and rough, and the hours are long, as Dr. Leo Eloesor of San Francisco found out in China not long ago. He went there with a medical team to set up health services and train people to help themselves.
They had one doctor for every 86,000 people, which is better than in some other parts of China. Many hospital wards had 2 patients in a bed, but the 2 at least had the same kind of disease. In the town of Shukchachuang one night, we had a lone visitor drop in after visiting hours. Took us 40 hours of surgery without a break to take care of the casualties.
Sometimes they meet in committee to act on complaints and petitions, like this one from an ex-chief in Tanganyika.
To the United Nations, I, Wamda Kudelilwa, at present residing at Bukosa, Uzinza, in the district of Mwanza, have unreasonably and suddenly been dethroned from my chiefdom, which I inherited from my parents. I humbly beg your lordships that I may be throned again.
Sometimes they're pitching for time off with pay, as in the case of Mildred Fairchild of Chicago, who's been after countries to improve conditions for working women.
We've already got 17 countries to agree to give expectant mothers 12 weeks off with pay from public funds. And the mother is guaranteed her job back at the end of the 12 weeks.
Surgery in China, working hours, dead rats, rivers, libraries. The world citizen is interested in all these things. and in all other things, if and as they relate to the well-being of his fellow man. He's not a goody-goody about it. You can't spon him by a self-made halo around his Homburg, if he wears a Homburg. He thinks of himself as practical, and as a rule, he's right. Only he's practical on a bigger scale than most of us. When he goes in for farming...
See that seed? Something new. A little thing like this may mean the difference between life and death to people in famine areas. It's a strain of hybrid corn that's tough, fights off diseases, and gives a terrific yield.
When he vaccinates 1 million cattle, or paddles up the Amazon to explore jungles, or searches for kids that were lost or stolen during the war, he means to benefit more than his bank account or his hometown. Whether he's a poet or an engineer, his slant on things is the kind that curves over the horizon and keeps going. Take a poet named Carl Sandburg, sitting in his living room in Flat Rock, North Carolina, telling the world about other citizens of the world, saying it in lines he wrote 15 years ago, before the United Nations came along.
This free man is a rare bird. And when you meet him, take a good look at him and try to figure him out. Because someday, when the United States of the earth gets going and runs smooth and pretty, there will be more of him than we have now.
They're not so hard to figure out, these birds, and neither are they as rare as they used to be. In fact, their habitat is very often among those alphabetical international agencies whose careers we somehow follow much less closely than that of the local baseball clubs. You've heard of some of them.
WHO.
By which is meant not the pronoun or the song of the same name, but the World Health Organization.
UNESCO.
Isn't the trade name of a biscuit. Stands for United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization.
ICAO.
Could be the name of a town in the Philippines, but it isn't. Stands for International Civil Aviation Organization.
FAO, UNICEF, UNSCOR, ITU, UPU, ECONSOC, Commission on Human Rights.
Clerk in Geneva, poet in North Carolina, surgeon in North China, engineer in Brazil. If you were to ask one of them, a citizen of the world, how he got that way, he'd give you a long answer with illustrations. And before you know it, the whole world would be in your lap. He'd ask you questions, too. Questions like,
You think the world has little to do with you, your friends, your deals, and what's hanging in the closet of your room?
He'd argue that you're so mixed up with the world right this minute, inside and out, past and present, that you can't tell where you begin and the world leaves off. Now, no matter what country you're a citizen of, he'd point to your foreign relations.
You really think you're an American 100% self-sufficient, owing nothing to any foreign parts or people?
And he'd advance his argument with a case in point.
Well, take at random a typical American. 100% self-sufficient. Relaxing at home after his dinner. Now, he lives, let's say, in Memphis, Tennessee.
Named after the capital of ancient Egypt.
And he's just finished drinking coffee.
From Venezuela.
He sits back and strikes a match.
Invented in France.
Lights up a cigar.
Invented in Cuba.
And picks up the evening paper.
Invented in China.
To read in bold print.
Invented in Germany.
That the state of Florida.
Named by Spaniards.
Will be spared a new hurricane.
So called by the Carib Indians.
Relieved, he glances at a clock.
Invented in Holland.
Notes that the time is now 10:05.
Numerals invented in Arabia.
Realizes that he missed a program on the radio.
Discovered in Italy.
Goes over and turns on his television set.
Invented in Scotland.
And watches a telecast. However, as his eyes are bad and he needs glasses...
Invented in England.
He gets a headache and takes an aspirin.
Invented in Germany.
Feeling better, he decides to go out for a walk in the rain. So he puts on his felt hat.
Felt, invented in Asia.
Slips rubbers on his feet.
The rubbers, not the feet. Invented in Mexico.
Takes his umbrella.
Invented in Assyria.
And goes out through the door.
First slammed by the Romans. But the world citizen wouldn't let you off there. He'd argue that even if you don't drink coffee, smoke cigars, get headaches, go through doors, or live in Memphis, and all that's possible, you could still, no matter what the situation, be part of the world's pattern. He'd tell you that the very currents of the world flow right through you.
But take this same fellow, back from his walk. He thinks that he is alone in his little room and out of touch with things. Well, actually, the whole of America is crowded into that room. And right behind America presses the world. Right this minute, there is passing through his room and his body 100 vibrations of light, sound, and speech. A chow-chow of amateurs, aircraft, shortwave, TV, AM, FM, flowing right through him. Not only ordinary broadcasts, but also things like facsimile, by which newspapers are sent through space. And the conversations of ships at sea. And scrambled speech, by which private radio conversations are hashed up to confound eavesdroppers. And pidgin English to the backwoods of New Guinea over station 9PA, Port Moresby.
Good day, all aboy. This fellow wireless belong Port Moresby. Now you had him talk. Me like ask him you long halip him all picking in about and about all place. Only no got something. No got clothes, no got kai, no got medicine.
And short waves. Oh, short waves from everywhere. All crowded into a little room that was just minding its own business in Memphis.
The same citizen of the world, if he were patient, would put down all this as step number one, getting you to agree that the world outside us is all mixed up with what's inside us and behind us and around us. He'd most likely say,
not only are you not isolated in the world, but the world that you are not isolated in is getting smaller and smaller. In fact, if you have scientific toys to play with, the Earth can be just a big balloon, and you can do tricks with time and distance.
And to show how easy it is to bring people together, our man of the world might take a couple of kids living 12,000 miles apart, get them to sing a duet without their ever meeting or speaking to each other, like this 12-year-old in Sweden.
I am a Swedish schoolgirl, and I am 12 years old. My name is Eva Rosenthal, and I live in Västervägen 27 in Stockholm, Sweden.
And an 11-year-old down and across the globe.
I am Jennifer Tyler, aged 11 years, of 9 Corona Avenue, Roseville, New South Wales, Australia.
And though neither Jennifer nor Eva ever stirred outside her country, or met each other, or talked to each other, or sung to each other by radio or telephone, they nevertheless can sing a duet across a shrunken world. It's authentic. We'll let you guess how it was done. The young citizen of today, who sings duets across the globe, sees his country shrink and his world shrink, and notes, if he's old enough to understand, that the electronic tube and the airplane has brought the far places together, and with them, their problems, interlocked in a network of cause and effect, a chain reaction of trouble. Take that dollar shortage in Europe, itself the result of a chain reaction that included 2 world wars. Further along in that reaction was a familiar link.
We are obliged to limit the importation of American automobiles.
And in Detroit, men are laid off. And that set off further troubles. But chain reaction can also be put in reverse gear. Take that situation in Italy, when they thought they'd have to shut down the steel mills because they had no furnace brick. There was a meeting of industrial experts, men who are not hiring out their services to a company, but just doing jobs as world citizens. Said the man from Italy,
the bricks we need, they can be made in Germany. If the quartzite for them can be got from mines in the French zone.
Said the Frenchman.
Oh, but there is no manpower for the quartzite mines in our zone.
Said the Italian.
We'll send the manpower.
Said the Frenchman.
But even if we have the manpower, we need digging equipment.
Said the Englishman.
Look, we can help you get that.
Said the Frenchman.
Oh, even so, winter is coming. The ground may be too hard to work for months.
Said the American.
Tell you what I'll do. I'll cable Washington for information on how we mine quartzite in Alaska.
Said the Frenchman.
That will do it.
Said the Italian.
Thank you very much.
A citizen of the world, when he becomes one, and there are no formalities about it, it happens gradually, like growing up, lets himself in for a fairly sobering experience. he finds that an awful lot of the facts of life in this vale of troubles range from sad to horrible. There are cold wars, hot wars, supersonic rockets, atom bombs, bacteriological weapons, tensions and crises, and even apart from frictions between the United States and Russia, between India and Pakistan, apart from war between communist and nationalist China, he finds that ordinary, everyday life turns up enough grim facts to make an imaginative man shiver in a Turkish bath. He doesn't know whether to call in a poet or a statistician to interpret the figures.
2/3 of the people of the world are undernourished.
That's so massive a number, it means nothing to anybody. Try it again.
Upwards of 1,600,000,000 people live from day to day not getting enough to eat.
That still doesn't do it. Too enormous to latch onto, let alone be moved by. But if you compress these hundreds of millions into a single family, the tragedy of statistics begins to take on some meaning. Pinpoint a starving child, or study the face of its mother, and you catch the barest glimpse of the infinite anguish of world hunger that could be anywhere. A beggar pulling your sleeve in Egypt. Or in the town of Drachmal in tropical Haiti. The woman who walked 17 miles across a mountain to trade 5 wild mangoes for a cupful of rice to feed her family of 5. Who told a UNESCO man.
Depuis une semaine, on n'a rien à se mettre sous la dent que quelques morts. On en tombe très malade. Les champs sont secs.
All we have had to eat for a week is a few wild mangoes. They have made us very sick. The fields are parched.
Of the many things that make up a world citizen, awareness of the suffering of others is one of the greatest. He has a talent for translating statistics into humanity. And sometimes he sees for himself how low are the lowest deaths. 5 years ago, a world citizen named John Meal of Michigan witnessed a famine in India.
For them, there was only the bare sidewalk where they begged for food until they were too weary and sick. All over the province, rice was dear and life was cheap. The streets were glutted with the dead and dying, sprawled together on the pavement and in the gutter. The human mind can adjust to almost anything, but I never realized how quickly until the day in Calcutta when I found myself eating a candy bar, disinterestedly watching a woman die.
Sometimes it's slow hunger, wasting people year after year. Sometimes it's famine that sweeps like flame. And all lands have known the scourge of it. Rome, when thousands drowned themselves in the Tiber rather than slowly starve. A 7-year famine in Egypt. Cannibalism in one of the Indian famines. 10 million dead in Bengal in 1 year. Famine in Ireland, China, Russia. The world citizen attacks famine as he would an enemy. And in a group like FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, he organizes action against it. One of the first things he goes after is rats.
We've got to figure ways of trapping the rats and killing the vermin that destroy 33 million tons of food every year, a full 1/10 of the world's supply.
And he approaches the problems of supply from all angles.
There's got to be more production from farms. We're helping in that. There's got to be better transportation of foods, less spoilage, bigger hauls, faster freights.
Sometimes he actually shows up with the victuals, as did Dr. Manuel Siegel of the UN's Children's Emergency Fund in the little town of Radomir, Bulgaria, recently. The children of the village hadn't drunk milk in any form for years. They'd never heard of milk in powdered form, and they were so suspicious that the mayor of Radomir, Semyon Dinev, had to bring them together in the public square and work on them. Now, Mr. Dinev couldn't speak any English, so I'll make like the mayor of Radomir, and we'll act out what actually happened that morning in the square. Picture the children standing all around, sullen-like, scared. I'm the mayor. My dear children, now, just look at this milk here. Cool, wet, Tastes delicious. It was sent to us by all the nice friends of Bulgaria, because it's what you need. Now, who'll step up and drink some? Oh, now you know our friends wouldn't send anything harmful. Don't you know that? Oh, I'm surprised. You older children, wouldn't you take a chance to show that the United Nations would never send us bad news? Not one of you?
I'll drink it.
Just one? All right, Georgie, come on up here. Now, you taste this and see if I'm wrong. Here. All right, stand back. Let him drink. Like the taste, Georgie?
It's good, but not as good as raw milk.
Oh, you feel sick from the poison?
No, I feel all right.
You still able to walk?
Sure, I feel fine.
You like some more?
Yeah, plenty.
There, children, you see? Georgie drank it, liked the taste, didn't keel over, and the day was won. But hunger has partners in crime. Nature is one of them. Droughts and floods, notably. Frosts, blights, locusts. But man contributes his share of damage. Good old man. He is almost entirely responsible for erosion, one of the 5 biggest problems on Earth. You ask a world citizen.
Erosion? That is a staggering world problem. There's not a country on Earth, from the poorest to the richest, that doesn't suffer from it.
The abused topsoil of continents washing out to sea on the flood crests of rivers, or being blown away by winds. Once fertile land, which man turned into dust bowl by axe, plow, fire, and gun. The destruction of forests, the tearing up of farmlands, the handiwork of man. And the good earth that has taken centuries to build sickens, dies, decays, and blows off in the wind. The face of Australia drifts out over the Tasman Sea. The soil of Oklahoma darkens the sky over New York. Dust rises from the dongas of South Africa. Rain cuts deeper into the barrancos of Guatemala. Man's larder and his garden crumble into powder and are whisked away like puffs of smoke. Farmers lose their crops, their land, their homes. Times grow hard. They look around for places to go. They sing mournful songs about it.
If times don't get better, boys, I'm gonna leave this place. Every wind that blows, boys, every wind that blows is carrying my old farm away. Heaven only knows. Times getting hard, boys, money getting scarce. If times don't get better, boys.
But times won't get better, boys, unless something is done about it on a world scale. And the boys that are hoping to do it are world citizens. In fact, they're already at it, hacking away at problems that underlie erosion and hunger. Countries in trouble can and do ask for specialists to examine them where it hurts and prescribe treatment. Specialists like G.F. Donhoff of Apeldoorn, Holland, who goes to Siam with 5 other experts from China, India, Africa, and the United States. As a team, they examine the country, and Mr. Donhoff reports.
We advise the Siamese government to look after its forests better, or there won't be any left. Why, timber is being stolen. My colleagues and I have 127 other specific recommendations to offer.
Across the world in South America, the Republic of Venezuela finds itself dangerously low on edible fats and oils. So it asks for a similar team of experts. K.S. Markley of New Orleans, chief of the team, recommends, among other things,
Well, plant African and American oil palms. Develop a good nut-cracking machine to get the oil from the palm nuts and get going on large-scale mechanized farming.
And in a potato field on the outskirts of Wrocław, Poland, Dr. W.A. Rowland of Cornell tells a group of Silesian farmers how to get rid of an international nuisance known as the Colorado potato beetle.
All right. Turn on the spray, please, and walk with it. Interpreter, tell him to walk slower so that he covers the foliage on all sides. Tell him to hold the nozzle of the sprayer closer to the plant. Got that?
Yes. Proszę zwolnić, tak aby opisywać liście po obu stronach, rozumie pan.
And while Rollins of Cornell is in Poland spraying bugs, Gray of Australia is in Ethiopia inoculating animals. Cobb Fleisch of Canada is in Hungary demonstrating farm machinery. Van der Ort of Holland is in China advising on flood control. And all over the world, specialists like them are sweating it out in the sun or shivering in the cold or swallowing dust on washboard roads. The battle is just beginning. Just the first set of skirmishes in what could develop into a grand-scale attack against hunger and erosion if only the world citizen and his fellow citizen can work in peace. Now, you'd think hunger and erosion would be grief enough for a single Earth in any one millennium. But they're only a couple of clumps in the heavy sack the world is storing. Millstones that no nation, however strong, can pack up in its old kit bag and smile away. Plenty of other troubles vex and worry the citizen of everywhere, some of them too famous and nasty to need much description. Killers like disease and poverty and war. A child in California gets trapped in a well in an accident, and the sympathy of the world hangs on the desperate attempt of a whole community to rescue her. The child dies. There is public grief. But every day of the year, tens of thousands of children are trapped by preventable diseases. And every day, thousands of them die. The roll call is an unending death march.
Malaria, 300 million cases every year.
8,000 die of it every day.
Tuberculosis, 50 million cases every year.
14,000 die of it every day.
Venereal diseases, parasitic diseases, virus diseases.
And never quite enough medicine or doctors to go around. The report from Ethiopia telling us
this country has 150 doctors of medicine for a population of over 15 million.
The report from India.
In India, it's somewhat better. One doctor for every 8,000 people.
And in the wealthiest country in the world.
There's one doctor for every 915 people in the United States, and that's not enough.
Germs have no politics and no frontiers. And down the centuries, they've killed 1,000 times more than all the wars of history. And in spite of available vaccines and sulfa drugs and antivirin and penicillin, disease, preventable disease, is still doing its dirty work. The death knell tolls for too many before their time.
Dead. Flavien Anton Roy, age 8, of Tananarive, Madagascar, of smallpox.
Dead. Damasi, age 21, of Ofa, Samoa, of schistosomiasis.
Dead. Stanislaw Karicki, 16, of Krakow, Poland, of tuberculosis.
The citizen of the North has enough on his mind without worrying about the yaws or leprosy of the tropics. The citizen of the tropics can't worry about influenza in the North. But the citizen of the world is concerned with both. And he writes his concern into the constitution of one of those alphabetical international agencies, the World Health Organization.
Enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being and is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security.
But I tell you this, it isn't just solemn words and high-sounding resolutions. As only one of its dozens of activities throughout the world, this band of world citizens called WHO operates a network of 14 radio stations to keep shipping of all countries alert to health conditions in all ports.
1
plague-infested rat found in Bombay town. Quarantine restrictions against Canton on account smallpox. 217 cases typhus in Colombia, 9 dead.
The work of World Health wouldn't get far if it merely reported diseases, although that's a big first step. It also gets there in a hurry with the medicines, as in the case of that fierce cholera epidemic in Egypt last year. 3,000 Egyptians a week were dying from cholera when Cairo appealed for help. And in no time, 6,000 miles away, a truck bearing vaccine and medical supplies was rushed with police escort from drug manufacturer plants in Philadelphia, up the pike, through the Holland Tunnel, out to LaGuardia Airfield in New York. The medicines were loaded on a waiting plane. Shipment went on its way to Egypt. Meanwhile, WHO rounded up its member nations. No one country in the world had enough anti-cholera vaccine on hand to stop that epidemic, so several pitched in.
From Afghanistan, 75,000 cc's of vaccine.
From China, 1 million cc's.
From Iraq, 200,000 cc's.
From the Soviet Union, 600,000 cc's.
From the United Kingdom, 12 ambulances.
From the United States, 1 million tablets of sulfa drugs.
From New York City's health department, 3,000 syringes.
From Italy, 1.5 million cc's.
When the goods arrived, deaths from cholera were passing 3,000 per week. Then, overnight. 8th week of epidemic, 330 deaths. 9th week, 79. 10th week, 39. 11th week, 9. 12th week, 2. 13th week, 1. 14th week, none. Of course, now the results aren't always as dramatic as in that cholera epidemic. The figures don't always shoot up and down that fast. But fantastic figures are involved at all times. Such as 100 million, count them, 100 million children being inoculated against TB by workers of the UN's Children's Emergency Fund.
Highest attainable standard of health is one of the rights of every human being and is fundamental to attainment of peace and security.
Attainment of peace and security? Did someone mention security? That old pot of porridge at the end of the rainbow? That mirage, slippery as a greased eel. The meal ticket that entitles you to live across the tracks from a rifled garbage pail. You mean to say social security, like health and hunger and erosion, is a world problem? Well, ask the fellow whose name is per capita, the brother of Anan. Ask the average American, the richest member of the capita family, what his per capita income is.
$1,400 a year.
Canadian?
$1,000 a year.
Norwegian?
1,100 kroner, about $550 a year.
Argentine?
300 a year.
Yugoslav?
$130 a year.
Brazilian?
1,400 cruceros, about $70 a year.
Indian?
$42 a year average income.
Chinese?
25 American dollars a year.
Hunger, erosion, disease, poverty. And on top of all this, war. Well, what can you say about war? That it's hell? It is. That it's a world problem? Of course. That it's uncivilized? Yeah. That it's expensive? Rather. Open the till. Reach into the till for the cost of killing a man. Do you know how much it costs to kill each enemy soldier in World War II?
$245,000 per man.
Now reach in for the price of saving a life. You know how much it costs to inoculate a child against tuberculosis?
10 cents.
fiercest face in the rogues' gallery of world problems, king of the beasts. And trailing behind it, disease, famine, poverty, erosion, overpopulation. Yet every one of these problems has been around a long time. Even back in the dimmest days of antiquity, there lived world citizens who took on the tough ones. They usually were martyred for their pains. In Greece, golden Greece, in the time of its glory, a stubborn old man who well loved his country and his city could say,
I am neither an Athenian nor a Greek, but a citizen of the world.
His name was Socrates. The early world citizen had only himself, or if persuasive, a few disciples to go with him. But always he was a man of courage. Wherever he turned up, as in Israel 700 years before Christ, the stern prophet Isaiah saying,
Let all the nations be gathered together, and let the people be assembled. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore.
And in China, in a time of famine, the sage Confucius took his brush one day and put down 4 words.
Under heaven, one family.
2,000 years further along in the New World, Ben Franklin of Philadelphia, goose quilling into his notebook.
God grant that not only the love of liberty, but a thorough knowledge of the rights of man may pervade all the nations of the earth, so that a philosopher may set his foot anywhere on its surface and say, This is my country.
In the near and far yesterdays, in times as old as the Old Testament, there were world citizens who stood against the enemies of all mankind, against poverty. How many famous, fated attempts by brave, lonely men to help the poor. But the work of their lives was as a candle to the ice cap of Greenland, against erosion. There were ancient warnings, too, but nevertheless, the hanging gardens fell, the terraced walls crumbled, the pastures blew away, the sands of the desert covered Nineveh and Troy, and Babylon was a bucket of ashes. Against disease, sacrifices to the gods, incantations, bloodletting, mumbo-jumbo. Against war, every formula from women denying love to their husbands, as suggested by a Greek named Aristophanes, to launching a peace ship as done by an American named Henry Ford. And all the time, weaving like a shuttle between the nations, the diplomats. The treaties and pacts and covenants added up to 100 small wars and 2 global wars. And out of it all, only the unvanquished Big Five remaining as menacing as ever. The Big Five of hunger, poverty, disease, erosion, and war. And the Big Five have their satellites. Ignorance, suspicion, hysteria, thought control, persecution, crime, and often the uneasy neutral corner, grimmest of all, the atom bomb. Well, you know, this could be gloom, despondency, and despair. Except there is a difference now. The world citizen has multiplied his numbers. Where once he was a solitary prophet, a poet, a monk, an emperor, far separated across time and geography, he is now organized as never before into a dozen or more great alphabetical international organizations and into extinct smaller non-governmental societies and associations. Some going in the same general direction as the United Nations, others in different directions. Some in a hurry, others patient. One headed by a housewife, one by a count, another by a bridge expert, others by an ex-prime minister named Churchill, a 27-year-old war vet named Whitehouse, a Supreme Court justice named Roberts. And still others have sprung up all over the map.
Asociación Pacifista Argentina. General Paz. Córdoba. Argentina.
Wereldfederalistenbeweging Amsterdam, Nederland.
दुनिया में मुत्तहिदा हुकूमत क़याम के लिए हिंदुस्तानी मुहिम दालमिया जैन नवाज नई दिल्ली हिंदुस्तान
Associazione Pax per gli Stati Uniti del Mondo, Roma, Italia.
Christopher Verdensverenigde Staten, Oslo, Norway. Front humain des citoyens du monde, Boulevard Victor Hugo, Neuilly, France.
United Nations Association, 11 Maiden Lane, London WC2, England.
Unitarian Service Committee, Boston. American Friends Service Committee, Philadelphia. Rotary International.
These outfits have more different approaches than a putting green, but they all are aiming at the same objective: service, security, and peace. But the UN itself and the agencies connected with it are by all odds the favorite vocation of the full-time citizen of the world. They attract him because they're best equipped to get things done, and they go after the biggest game: hunger, poverty, disease, erosion, war. But more than attacking great evil, they're on the alert to support great good. Certain things can't wait until all the hungry are fed and the sick are healed, but have to go forward at the same time. Massive things like education, culture, the freedoms, human rights. Even the matter of flying through the air with the greatest of safety is something the world citizen worries about. For example, that romantic but little-known Atlantic Patrol. You're a passenger in a plane over the North Atlantic at night, flying through an overcast at 18,000 feet. There's no land below for 1,000,000 square miles. Nevertheless, cutting through on the radio is a voice far down in the stormy darkness. It's the voice of Weather Ship Charlie passing along to you as to all North Atlantic planes the latest dope around 51 degrees north and 35 west.
Clipper 60, Weather Ship Charlie, visibility 12 miles, 12 miles, temperature 2929, wind 1919.
Pilots on the eastward run often give Charlie the latest intelligence from the mainland.
Clipper 60 to Weather Ship Charlie. Yanks and Senators were rained out, but I can tell you the score. Some of the others. Brooklyn 7, Brooklyn 7. New York 3, New York 3. Red Sox 8, Red Sox 8.
Charlie is one of 13 weather ships stationed in the Atlantic by another international outfit, ICAO, to promote safety of overseas plane traffic. The frontiers and the fight for a safer, saner, healthier world are everywhere. In the cabin of an airplane flying at 18,000 feet, and at the bottom of a Pennsylvania coal mine being inspected by world labor experts. And far more than airlines and equipment are surveyed for the general good. The mind of man is inspected, too. Archibald MacLeish, former librarian of Congress and one of the world's top-flight poets, helped to draft into the Constitution of UNESCO a sentence that may well become one of the great slogans of our century. Here is the sentence, spoken by its author.
Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed.
In the council room, and radiating outward to all compass points, the work goes on. The work of raising the battered head of humanity. Sometimes it takes the form of an epic declaration of human rights, supported by 48 countries. Sometimes it's as little as 4 words long.
Cada uno enseña uno.
The Mexican slogan, each one, teach one. The battle cry of a drive to wipe out illiteracy. They used the same slogan in China.
一个人教一个人.
You see, if the world citizen has any credo, it is to help people to help themselves in every way. George Townsend of Australia, UN trusteeship specialist on the Southwest Pacific, explained the philosophy for this program.
The aim is not to force backward people to become what we might think they ought to be, but to help them to improve and develop the way of life which they have chosen and in which they can be happy.
A good example of this was a program in Haiti, officially called Pilot Project in Fundamental Education. And it took in not only teaching, but a drive against hunger, poverty, erosion, and disease. It was a warm and human experience. staking out in a single rugged valley among 30,000 poor, hungry, illiterate people, a model for self-improvement that the rest of Haiti and the world could look to. To hear one of the UNESCO mission tell it.
When we first got there, hoping to teach the people how to be self-sufficient, it was heartbreaking. Our students were dying of starvation and disease. There'd been a drought. The land was eroded to begin with. There was no food. The water supply was polluted. The people were sick, superstitious, and desperately poor. They expressed their misery in song that at least cost them nothing to sing.
And then one day, they built a training center. It consisted of a clinic.
Malaria injections on the left, injections for yours on the right.
And a library.
For those who can read, here are books about the history of Haiti. For those who can't, class is tomorrow at 8.
And a classroom. And a demonstration farm.
But only by planting trees on hills where the ground is eroded will you be able to hold the water. Now, about planting vegetables.
And the word got around the countryside that a new thing called UNESCO had come to help the people, and they pitched in regardless of wages. They learned, first of all,
bad water means sickness. If the water is sick and you drink it, you get sick too.
Près du vaudou dit, maladie c'est mauvais esprit qui punissent.
I know the voodoo man says sickness is punishment from evil spirits, but let me explain something to you.
And they even got the voodoo man to cooperate. The valley folk got together and dug a deep well, singing at their work. They built a 17-mile road without being commissioned to. They went at it on no more than a suggestion. And the word spread around until Haitians showed up who had walked 30 and 40 miles across mountains to get a single injection or to learn more about the exciting thing called reading. After a while, the people began to look and feel better. They held their heads high in a way they'd never done before. And in due time, there were actually 2 christenings and an honorary drubbing, which came as a bouquet from the people of Marveal Valley for the project of UNESCO. In the Etienne family.
This little boy is named UNESCO Fabrius Etienne.
And over at the Beauvoirs?
I have named my little girl UNESCO Beauvoir.
The honorary dubbing fell to a small white terrier.
UNESCO! UNESCO!
Now, in some ways, the world citizen is like a country doctor on a world scale. If an ailing country calls him, he's there in a jiffy with machines or vaccines or new types of seed. But none of these activities can amount to much if the world can't get rid of public enemy number 1, war. And don't think our citizen hasn't tackled it. And he's brought it down. He's stopped no less than 3 wars in the past year. 3 out of 3 tries. It was no ordinary day for the cause of peace when a few weeks ago, an American Negro, grandson of a slave, sat before a shortwave microphone in a studio on the Isle of Rhodes and announced the result of his mediation of the Palestinian war. Here is that announcement, the voice of Dr. Ralph Bunch, UN mediator, speaking from Rhodes as he told the world of the armistice.
In the interest of peace and in the interest of the peoples of the Near East, who have suffered from a tragic and unnecessary war, I am highly gratified that these negotiations have succeeded, and that for the first time in the long history of the Palestine dispute, Arab and Jewish representatives have met, negotiated, and signed a formal agreement.
Thousands of miles from Palestine, the new nations of India and Pakistan were at war, an undeclared war which killed thousands of Muslims and Hindus. Armies were ready to decide whether the princely states of Kashmir and Jammu went to Pakistan or India. Then suddenly...
Truce! Cease fire!
Cease fire! Brought about by a team of mediators, doing in India what Dr. Bunch did in Palestine. And both sides calmed down and agreed to settle it with ballots. The world citizen did it again in the East Indies when he got the Netherlands and the Republic of Indonesia to call off their war and negotiate a settlement. 3 out of 3, and in less than a year's time. Not easy, much interrupted, much shot at, but in all the negotiations, nobody trying to change anybody's politics or religion, no plugging for one economic system against another, no taking sides. In fact, partisanship is one of the worst things that can happen to a citizen of the world. So much so that he takes an oath against it when he joins the UN staff. Here is Rahat Bokhari of Pakistan taking that oath.
I solemnly swear to regulate my conduct with the interests of the United Nations only in view, and not to seek or accept instructions in regard to the performance of my duty from any government or authority external to the United Nations.
The world citizen considers himself no less a patriot for taking on matters outside of his country than a son is any less a son for having interests outside his father's household. Here, for example, is America's own Admiral Nimitz explaining, especially for this program, his prospective mission to India and Pakistan.
On the 1st of last January, the fighting which had raged for 15 months between India and Pakistan over the question of Jammu and Kashmir came to an end. This resulted from the acceptance of proposals put forward by the United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan. Since that time, the terms of the ceasefire have substantially been carried out. This was an outstanding victory for the cause of peace throughout the world and for the United Nations in particular.
A national hero becomes an international servant, a working citizen who stands ready to referee a plebiscite. Admiral Nimitz has a low opinion of war as a way to settle an argument. He prefers other means.
Wars and fighting do not remove differences. They only deepen them. I hate war, and I know what I'm talking about. But differences can be settled or at least reduced by discussion and agreement. I believe in the United Nations as a means of preventing or even of reducing fighting. Only good can come in the end from cooperation through the United Nations. We have just got to get along together in this world.
So the admiral joins the poet, statistician, clerk, economist, veterinarian, the man who's doing world's work. It's certainly varied work. Sometimes it's pleasant, most of the time it's hard work, but once in a while it's dangerous, and the risk is high. It was so in Palestine in the case of Count Folke Bernadotte of Sweden. He was not the only citizen on world business to lose his life. Many of them died far from home, not for their countries at war, but for a world at peace. None of the dead men can speak for themselves, but one volunteer, a driver named George Hendricks of New York, who saw a colleague killed in Palestine, had this to say.
If I were asked to volunteer again for a danger spot, to work for a mission that was working for peace, there isn't much question in my mind whether I'd go or not. I'd go.
In the ordinary, unassorted jumble of daily life, with its deadlines and taxes and appointments and chores, there may seem little connection between the citizen of the world and the people of the world. But there's hardly a man alive who doesn't stand to benefit, some way or another, by the work this citizen has cut out for himself. There are even those who think the citizen is just about the greatest hope on 2 feet, and that he's involved with every one of us, whether we know it or not, no matter how unrelated we may be, or how scattered our voices, like these.
Hand me the wrench there, Joe.
20% more yield since the switch to contour plowing.
The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock.
The X-ray will only take a second.
Did you see this piece in the Herald?
Darling, it's a wonderful ring. My baby is due in December.
These people and what they say may seem as unrelated to the citizen of the world as they are to each other. But when you put together the jigsaw pieces of their lives, they add up to a picture. And in this picture, it's possible to see how all stand to benefit if the citizen of the world comes through with the answer to their needs. Try that parlay again.
Hand me the wrench there, Joe.
Comes through with the lucky combination that produces full pay envelopes and steady work.
Got 20% bigger yield since I started contour flour.
Comes through with good prices for produce, crops that are free of blight.
The wolf and the lamb shall feed together.
Comes through with the rights for the man of faith, whether his symbol be cross, crescent, or Star of David.
Did you see that piece in the Herald?
Comes through with a free press and freedom of information.
The X-ray will only take a second.
Comes through with victory over the big killers. Brings bloom to the sickly parts of the earth.
Darling, it's a wonderful ring.
Keeps young couples from being separated by walls for years or forever.
My baby is due in December.
Comes through with assurances to the mother that she's not creating life only to have it starved, impoverished, or slaughtered. Comes through for the unborn, who will bear our names and faces, who will carry on our languages and some of our habits, size up the monuments to our accomplishments and mistakes, and weigh our record in a balance between sheer wonder and sheer horror. When long years from now the full returns are in, and there can be a grand accounting, perhaps someone will place a footnote with a bright star marking it.
Around mid-century came the first citizen of the world to gang up against the terrible Big Five to take them on.
Meanwhile, tomorrow is tomorrow, and the year 2000 is a long way off. There's work ahead, rubble to clean up, quarrels to settle, fears to quell, mouths to feed, 1,000 chores to do. And in the doing, the citizen of the world will be right there pitching with the rest of us who care. For to him and what concerns him, a seed is not too little, nor is all humankind too big.
The CBS Documentary Unit has brought you Lee J. Cobb in Citizen of the World, written and directed by Norman Corwin, with a musical score composed and conducted by Alexander Semler. The program was produced by Werner Michel. Tonight's cast included Paul Bouchard, Joseph DeSantis, Robert Dryden, Stephen Hill, Charles Irving, Gerald Keane, Paul Mann, Bryna Rayburn, Ann Shepard, Carl Swenson, and Hans von Steuer. The folk tune was sung by Oscar Brand. The CBS Documentary Unit wishes to thank the United Nations, UNESCO, and other specialized agencies, also the state broadcasting systems of Sweden and Australia, for cooperating in the preparation of this broadcast, portions of which were transcribed. This is Vern Bennett speaking. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.